You're listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 48. Today is for us perfectionists. Do you ever find yourself procrastinating or leaving things to the very last minute? Do you often worry if you're making the right decision, which can actually stop you from making a decision altogether? Do you struggle letting people help because you have a hard time trusting that they will do it the way that you want? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, you may just be a perfectionist like myself. So today we're going to take a deep dive into what perfectionism is, why we are perfectionists, and how we can avoid letting it hinder us in life and business. So grab yourself a cup of organic tea and let's get to it. You are listening to Love Unplugged, a podcast focused on love in all its forms. I'm your host, Jessica Frigon, hopeful romantic and founder of Project Love. I found that too often love is set aside or taken for granted, and we tend to forget how to care for ourselves and our important relationships in the day-to-day chaos. So let's slow down, tune in, and begin our journey of rediscovering love. From honest heart-to-heart conversations with real couples and knowledgeable guests to deep dive reviews of new products and services that will help you feel beautiful inside and out. If you're looking for relatable advice or wanting to be inspired by real-life love stories, you've come to the right place. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hello, loves. Today I am joined by the lovely Sam Laura Brown. She is a mindset coach, founder of the Perfectionist Getting Shit Done group coaching program, and host of the top-rated podcast, The Perfectionism Project. She has coached and supported thousands of women on their journey to beating procrastination, overcoming perfectionism, and becoming their best self. And I must say, I am super excited about because I am a perfectionist at heart, and I am just so interested in diving deep into the subject and learning more about how I can avoid the pitfalls that sometimes comes with that. So welcome, Sam. I am so honored to have you as my guest, and I'm so excited to learn all about your story and advice. But before we start, for those that don't know you yet, I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on the podcast. As you have mentioned, I am a mindset coach and I work with perfectionists, and I have my podcast and our group coaching program, Perfectionist Getting Shit Done. And if you want me to get into how that all came about, I definitely can, because I didn't realize I was even a perfectionist until a couple of years ago.
Wow. that's a late realization.
Yeah, so it all came about when I started my blog. And of course, I had all of the perfectionist tendencies, and we can go more into what perfectionism really is. But I had that common understanding that most have about perfectionism, which is that perfectionists love being neat and organized, and they're really on top of everything. And I never felt like I fit that description, though, of course, I was procrastinating and holding myself back, scared of judgment, all of that kind of thing. But I never registered that was a perfectionist mindset. But when it came to starting my blog when I was in my early 20s and I felt like I had no business whatsoever sharing my opinion, I actually started my blog talking about how to make the most of your 20s, because I didn't know about this whole perfectionism thing that I talk about now. And when I launched that blog, which I did privately, I did not tell a single person in my real life, including my now fiance, Steve, but we'd been together for over 5 years at that time. And I still was just so scared of judgment and shame that I didn't tell anyone about it. But I'd listened to podcasts that talked about online business, and that's why I love podcasts so much. I'd been wrapped up in this world of entrepreneurship, and eventually I thought maybe I could do that as well. So I started my blog, and then I found myself hiding it from everyone. I was also posting. If I posted, it actually took me 3 months to share my first blog post, because I bought the domain and then I just had this freak out. I stopped listening to podcasts altogether because they just reminded me about the blog I had that I'd abandoned. So it took me 3 months to post my first post and get that published. And then once I published it, I would be editing after it was published, and no one was even reading my blog at that time because I hadn't told friends and family and I wasn't marketing it. but I still was so embarrassed about it. And at that time as well, I wasn't even sharing an opinion. I was just like, hey, here's this blog post from someone else that I liked, or here's this YouTube video. And so that's when all of the perfectionism really came to the surface, because when we're in the school setting or when we have a job and there are external deadlines, you can actually do very well as a perfectionist. I did really well in school. I also went to uni. I have a law degree, a finance degree. I was able to do well in that with the perfectionist mindset. But when it came to putting myself out there and getting out of my comfort zone, those tendencies really, really, really held me back. And then since then, I've been on a journey of discovering why I was getting in my own way. And then when I discovered it was the perfectionist mindset, how to actually overcome that mindset and get into a growth mindset so I can show up fully and help people do the same.
That's so interesting. Okay, so I kind of want to dive into that because when I first started my blog, I did not want to share it with anybody either. And even to this day, I will block certain people that are super close to me from my stories and stuff because I shy away from having them see what I'm doing. And even when people in the past would ask me, oh, so what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. I would never say that I was blogging about this or I had created a business about this. I was always kind of deferring the question. And people who knew what I was doing, they'd be like, why don't you just tell them what you're doing? Like, why are you hiding it? So I would love to know, like, why we do this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned it too, that you had the same experience, because when I started my blog, a lot of the advice out there about how to get it off the ground was tell your friends and family, post about it on your personal Facebook feed. And nothing felt more horrific than telling the people that loved me what I was up to. And it really is about that perfectionist mindset. So we can go into what that is, but perfectionists aren't perfect people. They're people who feel ashamed that they're not perfect. So perfectionism is really just a strategy to avoid shame. And when it comes to hiding ourselves from our loved ones, what's really going on is that we want, as humans, that connection and the praise and the approval. And for a lot of the people that I work with, they have done well in school, they're high achievers, and they have been praised for being smart and for doing things well. And so when it gets to something that we feel that we're still learning about, or we're not quite good at yet, or it's not even socially acceptable to be doing, because despite everyone saying that, the ship has sailed with blogging and podcasts, it's still very, very new. And so it can just feel so vulnerable to share our real selves. So we share this filtered version of ourselves because we think people will like it. And the way that we also protect ourselves is because we do that, if they don't like us, it doesn't hurt as bad because we haven't showed them our real self. So we can kind of comfort ourselves by saying, well, yeah, they didn't like me, but they don't even really know me. So we're really scared for people to actually know us, because then that rejection feels so vulnerable and we feel a lot of shame around it. And really, we're just trying to avoid shame. And as humans, shame is unavoidable. So this strategy to avoid shame does not actually work, but that's really what's going on. And I experienced it firsthand. And I remember, I think it was like a couple of years into my blog, and I had a completely separate Instagram account for blogging stuff, and Instagram had made the connection that it was me and told my people on my personal Instagram feed about this account. And I remember people started following it, and I don't think I've ever had a proper panic attack in my life, so I'm not trying to say I have, but I felt like that hot flush of shame, and it just was like, holy crap. And then, of course, the world kept spinning. And since then, a lot of people that I am close with have been inspired by what I do and learn from what I do. And of course, a lot of people don't even care. Like, that it's just like the same way that I'm not thinking about their job and what they're up to. They're not really thinking about what I'm up to that much either. But it's just so vulnerable to show people our real selves. And for me, that's really what happened when I started my blog. I was talking about personal development, which is something I was genuinely interested in. It was the real me. And when I was at uni studying law and finance, like that felt less vulnerable because that wasn't something I was passionate about. So if I failed at it, then it would have been like, oh, well, yeah, but I didn't really care about it that much. But I cared about personal development so much that it felt extra vulnerable. And a lot of us end up spending our lives doing things we don't care about as much because it feels less vulnerable if we fail at those things.
Interesting. The whole time I'm like, yes. Yes. That's amazing. Do you think that, because you do a lot of solo shows where you talk, like it's just you, do
Mhm.
you think that that's helped you kind of get over that a little bit? Because I've noticed, which is really embarrassing to say, that I might be using my guest shows, which is the majority of them now, as a crutch to not put myself in the front and not be vulnerable and share my story, and more so just kind of be that medium between the other person and my community and share their experience.
Yeah. So, as you're saying, so my podcast, I do solo shows, and as people can probably tell, I can talk for a long time. So I really enjoy doing that. But of course, when I started, it felt very vulnerable. It still does. And I think a lot of people think, well, once you have a lot of listeners, it gets easier. But that isn't necessarily the case if we don't do the work on our mindset. It can actually just feel even scarier because there are more people listening and more people to let down. But I first started like talking on Snapchat back in the day and doing Snapchat stories and then Instagram stories. And one of the best things that's helped me that I highly recommend for someone creating content is to create content, particularly like a podcast or YouTube, without editing it. So my podcast, if I do a 2-hour episode, it's with no edits. It's literally just me chatting for 2 hours, which is tiring because I don't have a break when the other person's talking. It's just me going on. But that really helps to get out of my head that, oh, I can just say that again and I'll just stop for a second and repeat it and then stop for a second and just try and get it just right. And that way it comes across very chatty, very conversational, which is the kind of podcast I love listening the most. And it means my listeners feel like they're my friend because I talk to them the same way that I talk to a friend. When I'm with a friend, I don't say, actually, scrap that. I messed that up. Let's do that over. You just have to roll with it. So that has really helped me. It also helps get content out there much more quickly because you just do it once, but it just takes that practice and it's very cathartic to do as well. So there's definitely those benefits, but it is going to feel vulnerable to do it if it's not something you're used to doing. But I would highly recommend if you're thinking of doing more solo shows. I personally love solo shows the most of any kind of podcast episode, but it's really helped in doing Instagram stories. And I can totally relate to what you've shared about having your friends on Instagram. I haven't blocked anyone or anything like that, but I notice if my friends or like people I used to know from different workplaces are watching, it feels very vulnerable, much more vulnerable than having thousands of strangers watch it. And it's easy to think, oh, what are they thinking about this? And of course, we never know. And often they're actually thinking something positive. But I still, even to this day, when I'm posting and I'm 6 years into it, I'm still thinking, like, oh, what about this friend or what about that friend? And at this point, I've just had to recognize my brain is probably going to keep freaking out like that forever. And so instead of listening to that fear, to just go, okay, that's my brain freaking out. That doesn't mean I should listen. And also, I just wanted to mention too, with my podcast episodes, it's not like I finish recording an episode and I'm like, holy crap, that was amazing. That's going to be a game changer for people. Almost all the time, I think, oh, that probably wasn't really helpful. I didn't say that quite right. I wasn't in flow and all of that. Like it's very rare that I finish an episode that I record and I feel like it was done really well. But I have also just learned that my brain is going to tell me all of this stuff at the end of the episode and will try and get me to not publish the episode or to redo it. But when I ignore my brain saying that and just go, okay, I get it, you're freaking out, let's just publish it anyway, often those episodes are the ones that do the best. Even when I'm like, I was off on all these tangents and I was just rambling on and it didn't make sense and these tips weren't helpful, those are the ones that people say to me, that really made a difference. And the ones where I feel like, yes, I nailed that, people like, but it doesn't seem to have the same kind of connection. So I just want to encourage anyone listening, if you are creating content and you have that voice in your head that says, oh, that's not good enough, I have that voice too. Jessica probably has that voice too. But just know that everyone you are looking up to and thinking they're probably having an easy time has that same voice that is scared of disconnection and the rejection and all of that kind of thing. And that the job is to ignore the voice instead of waiting for that voice to disappear.
That's perfectly said. I definitely agree with that. And I'm definitely going to be doing more solo shows. That is one of my goals. So something I'm going to have to work on. And I love the fact that you don't edit.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm totally going to get into that mindset. Like, oh, I can just change that. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to read from a script so that I get it perfectly so that I don't have to edit. And yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
just
And
going to try to do it your way.
it's really helpful as well for someone who is for anyone who's wanting to be on other podcasts or collaborate with others, that, for example, I'm so comfortable being on this interview doing this chat with you because I talk unedited all the time. So it means when I'm going on someone else's podcast and they're in control of the edits, that I'm not thinking, oh my goodness, like I'm going to have to get them to edit this or re-say that. I just know I've developed that skill and that ability to hold a train of thought. And a lot of times in an episode, I'm like, oh shit, I've completely forgotten what I'm saying. And that's okay, because that's what happens in real life when we're talking to our friends. You go, oh shit, what was that thing that I was saying? So it's really important to just remember that everyone else is having a similar experience to you, and it is really scary to show up, but when your brain is freaking out, like, it's normal, and to just stop waiting for it to disappear.
Yeah, definitely. So, what is a perfectionist? I want to get into how can you identify as early as possible if you are one so that you can start working on that.
What are the signs and like the
Yeah.
how it manifests? So perfectionism, I just want to preface with saying, is not a like a condition or something that you're going to have for your whole life. It's just a mindset, a set of beliefs that we have that kind of manifest in these different tendencies and cause us to get in our own way. And so if you can identify with what I do share when I'm talking about perfectionism, please don't think, oh, like there's something wrong with me. I was so empowered when I actually kind of pieced together what perfectionism really is. Because it gave me language around my struggles, and that language enabled me to actually find tools to help me get out of that mindset. So this isn't about putting a label on ourselves and going, this is just the way I am, and now I just have to learn how to manage perfectionism. We're not about managing it. We're about overcoming it, getting into a growth mindset. So the perfectionist mindset is, again, a strategy to avoid shame. And as Brene Brown says, it's this idea that if we just look perfect and do everything perfectly, then we can avoid shame, judgment, and blame. So it's about avoiding negative emotion, particularly the most painful emotions. And the way that that manifests is not in being neat and organized. So for some, it might be. For most perfectionists, it's procrastination, the all or nothing mindset, people pleasing, overthinking, being indecisive, waiting for the perfect time to start. Those are just some of the different ways that it tends to come up, and we can talk about different ones of those. But I also like to, when I'm talking about perfectionism, talk about the fixed and the growth mindset, which is a concept that was created by Dr. Carol Dweck. Her book Mindset is incredible. I highly recommend it. But she talks about this fixed mindset where you believe that your intelligence, your talents, your abilities are fixed. And so basically everything you do is evidence of whether or not you are good enough. So someone in a fixed mindset sees effort as a sign of inadequacy. And a lot of perfectionists have a huge fear around wasting effort. Like they don't want to set a big goal in case they don't achieve it, and they'll feel disappointed and they'll have wasted all of that effort. And to overcome perfectionism, quote unquote, we are just creating a growth mindset. So the difference with the growth mindset is when you're in that mindset, you actually live by the idea that it's better to try and fail than to never try at all. Someone who is a perfectionist in a fixed mindset, they intellectually understand that failure is part of the journey. But if you look at their actions, they live by the idea that it's better to not try than it is to fail. So the reason we procrastinate is because that's just a way that we can withhold effort. So a way that this came up for me, and that actually can still reap a lot of great results when there's an external deadline, is when I was in school, I always did everything at the last minute. I had a whole story around that I did my best work under pressure. The reason though that I procrastinated was because if I did badly, I could say, oh, but I would have done better if I procrastinated. So it protected my potential in that sense and my intelligence, that idea I had around being smart, because I could blame procrastination for lack of results. And if I did well, I could say, well, imagine how well I would have done if I didn't procrastinate. So when I procrastinated and left it to the last minute, I got to feel smart no matter the outcome. And so really perfectionism, for a lot of perfectionists, it's all about trying to protect our identity, that we're smart and intelligent, and we want to protect that because we have been given praise and love when we've been growing up from well-meaning people for being smart. And instead of that making us want to go out there and do amazing things, it makes us shrink our world so that we always appear to be smart.
I just feel like there should be a mic drop at this moment. That is so true. Like, I can't relate to that anymore. If I give myself too much time to do something, I'm going to wait until that very last minute where it's like, now I'm not rushing, but like now it's power through time, like very, very deep focus time to get it done in time. But I do that all the time.
I think it's so common, this story around doing our best work at the last minute.
That's insane. Yeah. I can't get over that. So how do we change that so that we're no longer living in that type of a mindset and leaving things to the last minute? And obviously that stresses people out. I know it stresses me out, and I always constantly wonder, why do I keep doing this to myself? I had so much time I could have gotten it done in. So how do we change that behavior?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that too. I just wanted to quickly touch on what you said, because when you're talking about you feel stressed, and probably my guess is overwhelmed as well, and we think, oh, like, why do I keep doing this? I hate feeling stressed. I hate feeling overwhelmed. I just want to feel organized. I just want to feel on top of everything and be productive. Like, perfectionists love feeling productive and do a lot of procrasti researching and procrasti learning, because you get to feel productive without feeling vulnerable. But it's important to note, part of the reason that perfectionists procrastinate is because procrastinating and feeling stressed and overwhelmed, like a particularly overwhelm, becomes the emotional home for a perfectionist. So when we're not feeling overwhelmed, it feels like we're not doing enough and that there's something wrong. So often perfectionists, they will start getting their life organized. Maybe they'll start planning and actually following through with those plans, or doing healthy habits and things like that. And then there's just kind of this feeling there of like, oh, like, I'm actually doing everything I promised myself I'd do, and everything's going well, and it feels uncomfortable. And so we go back into the stress and the chaos. I did an episode maybe 6 months ago now about 3 signs you're secretly addicted to chaos. And a lot of us are secretly addicted to that chaos. And I have found myself that when I am not procrastinating and I'm just getting shit done, my life feels really boring, because having that overwhelm and that stress actually adds drama to my life. And so when I'm not doing that, I'm like, oh, this is great, but like, is this all there is? I'm just ticking off my to-do list and everything. Like, it's really crazy. And if you haven't, like, if there's someone listening who has never been in that place where they're stopping procrastination and following through, it might sound a bit crazy that when you get there, it's like, oh, wait, like, you realize procrastination, is actually serving you in so many ways. It's making your life seem exciting. It's also protecting your potential. So really, to answer that question you had about how to get out of this, like leaving things to the last minute and procrastinating, it's first to have that awareness around why you actually procrastinate. A lot of perfectionists have this idea that procrastination relates to being lazy, and it's so much easier to say, I'm just a lazy person, instead of saying, I'm just a scared person. We procrastinate because we're scared. We're scared of feeling that shame that might come if we show up fully and we don't get the praise and connection and love that we're wanting. So you have to have that awareness first of how procrastination actually serves you in so many ways, and also your identity around being a procrastinator. I think when it comes to this conversation around procrastination, there's a lot of tips about, okay, install this extension on your browser and it will stop the internet from working, and then you can stop procrastinating. But we know that if we're procrastinating to avoid something uncomfortable, we're just going to go look in the fridge or scroll on Instagram, and it's just kind of managing that desire. But what we really want to do is change our identity that we have so that that desire actually diminishes, instead of just trying to have that desire there and be blocking it with apps and different things. They can be helpful, but really we need to do that deeper work around identity. And what I mean when I say identity is, however we finish the sentence, I'm the kind of person who, or I'm not the kind of person who, or when we say I never or I always, it's those kind of statements that form the story we tell ourselves about who we are. And as humans, we always want to be right about who we are. We always act in accordance with who we are. So my guess is, for anyone listening, you probably have a story that you are a procrastinator. And as long as you have that story that you're a procrastinator, or that you do your best work at the last minute, which is basically the same thing, saying you're a procrastinator, but making it sound really productive and really good. But if you believe you're a procrastinator, no matter what strategies you implement, you will be pulled back to being a procrastinator so that you can be right about who you are. So you have to do that work before you start procrastinating to believe that you don't procrastinate. And there's a whole process that we can talk about if you want to go into that, but you need to actually start thinking about, like, most of us can identify one person in our life that we think is a little weird because they don't actually procrastinate on things. And we need to think, okay, how did they actually think? And for me, my fiance Steve, like when he was doing his studies, he'd get an assignment and be like, okay, I need to start this. Like, I got this assignment, I'll just get started straight away. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, aren't you going to wait till like the 48-hour crunch time right before it's due? He's like, why would I do that? Like, I'm going to get it done ahead of time and do the best I can. So he was really in a growth mindset around it. And it just seemed so strange to me. But when I look at, okay, if I was thinking in that way, then he's not having to manage a desire to procrastination. He doesn't have to install apps on his phone to get him to not look at Instagram or Facebook or anything like that, because the desire actually isn't there. And it's similar to, if you think about, for someone who's not a smoker, like I'm not a smoker. So if someone put a pack of cigarettes here, I'm not having to manage any desire around, should I smoke? Shouldn't I smoke? Should I smoke? Shouldn't I smoke? I have no desire to even smoke. So it's similar to that instead of having this desire to procrastinate and then we're trying to block it and manage it and should I, shouldn't I, we just get into that mindset where we're like, I don't even want to do that. So that's a whole process, but that's really important. A lot of us are trying all these procrastination tips without doing the identity work and then wondering why we just fall back into our old ways.
I want to talk about my next question, making the right decision. So as a perfectionist myself, I always overthink things. I kind of sit there and wonder, am I making the right choice? Should I be going and doing this? Should I be doing that? And then sometimes I will let the Instagram scroll kind of take me off that path because I see what everybody else is doing. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should be doing it like that and things like that. So how do we get over that habit, but then also let go of that fear of making that perfect decision and getting it right the first time?
Yeah, great question. So it really begins with getting out of this idea that there is a right decision. And I think growing up, we're taught this, that there are right decisions and wrong decisions and everything's black and white like that. But it isn't actually the case. And I really love teaching that there is no right decision, that you just make the best decision you can with what you know at the time. And then you stick to that decision until new information comes in. Because a lot of us make a decision, if we make one at all. As I said at the beginning, perfectionists are really indecisive. Feels very vulnerable to make a decision. It's so much less vulnerable to be like, well, I'd be successful if I could just figure out what to do with my life. Like, we stay in confusion because that's a great way to hide from actually having to show up and do the work. So it's getting out of that idea that there is a right decision. Instead, making the best decision, and then not second guessing it, and knowing that your brain, as soon as you make a powerful decision, especially if it's one that's going to put you in a place of vulnerability and having that feeling that others might reject you or you might end up feeling ashamed, that your brain will tell you this is a shitty idea. We should change this. We should go look on Instagram and see what everyone else is doing. Let me just go quickly watch 10 YouTube tutorials to see how to actually do this properly. It's normal to have that, but we have to make sure that when we're changing our decision, that it's because new information has come in. It's not just because fear and doubt have come in. A lot of us mistake that fear and doubt for being information. Oh, that's my gut telling me this is the wrong decision. No, that is your brain telling you that you need to stay alive and survive, and that by putting yourself out there and risking rejection and risking being separated from the crowd, you could die. Like, our brains are still that primitive brain that is thinking that separation and disconnection from others is death. So you have to make sure that you're not thinking that when you're scared after making a decision or have doubt, that that's your gut. It is your brain trying to keep you alive. So really, as I've shared a few times now in this episode, a lot of the personal work I do to overcome perfectionism is to just notice how my brain will freak out a lot, and to learn how to not listen to it instead of expecting the freak out to not be there. And a lot of us like, no, I can only make decisions when I'm not in any fear and I'm not having any doubt about things and I'm completely confident. And we're always waiting for this day where we have complete confidence. And unfortunately, especially in entrepreneurship, that is not how it works. You need to actually take action, because action is what creates clarity, and confusion and being indecisive stops us from taking action. That's why we love it so much. So getting out of that idea that there's a right decision. And one way that you can do this, well, there's a few different things I like to think about. Advantages versus advantages. I don't do pros and cons lists. I personally don't find them helpful, because when we do a pros and cons, we want to choose the least bad option rather than the option that has the most upside. So I like to just look at, like, if someone has a big life decision, should I do this one, list out the advantages? Should I do that one, list out the advantages? Don't write any of the cons. Often what will happen is that one of them just has a whole big list of advantages and it's clearly the best option, the one that's going to lead to growth, but we're scared to do it. And it's going to create uncertainty. So we go, oh, well, which one should I do? So I love doing that. And also thinking about, well, if both options worked, if both were going to be successful, which one would I do? Instead of when we're trying to make this right decision and try and control the outcomes, to be like, okay, if plan A worked, plan B worked, plan C worked, which would I prefer to do? Which one would I enjoy more in terms of the process, or which one would I learn more from, and then choosing that one. So I hope that helps. There's a lot we could go into, so I'm not going to say too much about it unless you want to go more into it, but making decisions is so powerful. As Napoleon Hill says, or has said, that successful people make decisions quickly and change them slowly. Unsuccessful people make decisions slowly and change them quickly. So it's recognizing that desire to change your decisions quickly and to not give in to that desire.
I love that. Okay, so let's talk about overachievers.
Yes.
Because I know perfectionists can definitely push themselves to, go after those goals and then do everything humanly possible to achieve them. But when our bodies are telling us to rest or to stop, like I've struggled with this myself, I am just constantly go, 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 and I want to achieve, but I neglect taking care of what my body is telling me when I need to rest and whatnot. Just like today, I'm not going to lie, I have food poisoning and I'm sick right now, but I am pushing through because
Should have rescheduled.
this is just how I am. Exactly. But that's just how it is for me. I don't know if that's a perfectionist tendency, but I'm always just constantly pushing myself to continue.
So what are you scared will happen if you had rescheduled? Or, like, for example, just in case it helps anyone listening, like, to just quickly talk about, like, what was going through your mind where you have food poisoning, like, you didn't know if I'd reschedule, but I would have. So what stopped you from asking or having that break?
Well, in my head, I'm like, this doesn't look good for me because I don't know you, first of all, to be asking last minute to postpone. Second of all, who knows, maybe your schedule may not permit for a while to have the chat, so I might miss out in that department. And really, it's just, I guess, not not staying on top of things the way that I expect myself to.
Yeah, and so you can see from that answer, it's all about not wanting to be either rejected or for there to be some kind of shame there. And you could like in these kinds of situations, which you do all the time, myself included, like you could have asked, hey, could we reschedule? If not, totally okay, let's do today. And I would have said, yeah, great, let's reschedule. I can do next week or tomorrow or whatever. I'm not actually that booked out as it may sound like. So it's so interesting. I do it, and I'm not saying that to say you should have done anything differently, but I think it's just such a great example of how there are these little moments where we make all of these assumptions about how it will appear, because being on the other end, I would never think less of someone for rescheduling when they have food poisoning. And I would think, great, look after yourself. Let's chat when you feel better. And so we kind of just project all of our insecurities onto others and think that they're thinking the things about us that we think about ourselves. So, yeah, it's really interesting. So, on the topic of how to rest without feeling guilty, one thing that I have done, and I have struggled with this, and I can totally relate. And like perfectionists love being productive because we think, okay, if I'm productive, I'll be successful. And if I'm successful, I'll get praise and love and I'll be accepted. Like it's all about, we think that that's the best strategy for receiving love from others. And so when we're being unproductive, which a lot of times we are because we're so scared of rejection that it feels better to procrastinate than to risk actually showing up and not being good enough. But we're really just scared to be unproductive in case, because we equate that with rejection and shame and not feeling love and all of that. So I get it. And something that I have done the work of doing is learning how to rest without guilt. And I have done that by forcing myself to have time off. And this kind of came about when I read the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Loved Tim Ferriss, and I loved in that book he talked about working for work's sake and how what can happen once you get really efficient and effective is that you will be working a lot less, but if you don't actually develop your life beyond work or other kinds of things that you're interested in, you will go back to working for work's sake just to fill up the time, just because it feels good to be working because you're like, okay, I'm being productive and then I'm going to be successful. And it feels very vulnerable to not be doing something productive 24/7. So when I read that, I was like, holy shit, I definitely work for work's sake a lot of the time. And I can still even feel myself like a few weeks ago, I did a promotion and everything was running exactly as planned. And I have a team that work with me and we were all like on track with everything. And I had like this extra buffer of a week that I normally wouldn't have. And I was like, oh, this feels so uncomfortable to be on top of everything when usually I wouldn't be feeling that way. And to just notice how I kind of found myself self-sabotaging and extending how long things would take so I could fill up that time. So I'm not saying all of this as someone who has mastered how to rest without feeling guilty. And when we do have a lot of time, how to still really stick to those strict time constraints and things like that. But after reading that book, started forcing myself to have a day off per week. And this was when I was working part-time. So in case it helps anyone listening, just to know a bit about my journey as well in terms of how it evolved that I'm now full-time in my business. So after uni, after I graduated, I worked in insolvency accounting for a couple of years full-time. And then to pursue blogging, I went back to a part-time job I had at uni that I did in the afternoons. And I thought that, oh, I'm going to have more time to do blogging. I'm definitely going to be able to be more successful. And of course, when I made that transition, I just realized that I was using lack of time as an excuse. And suddenly I had all this time and I was like, oh crap, actually, I feel so vulnerable now. So then in July 2019, I transitioned going full-time into my business. If anyone wants to know more about that, I do have a full episode on it on my podcast. But I'm saying that because when I took that day off, it wasn't when I was working full-time in my business. I still didn't feel like I had enough time to grow my business, but I made myself have this day off because I was like, I don't actually know what I do that, like, I love my business. I love personal development. I love all the things to do with it. But still, that doesn't mean I should do it all the time. Like, I love Netflix too. That doesn't mean I should do it 24/7. And when I actually started enforcing this, a lot of people in my life are like, but you love your business, you love what you do. Why would you want to have time off? It's like, because it's not my whole identity. And at the moment, it is my whole identity. And that means that really, if business is going well, I feel good about myself. If the business isn't going well and that's my perception, my stories that I have about how it's going, then I don't feel good about myself and I don't want it to be tied that way. It's not healthy, it's not productive. And so I had that day off to actually figure out, what do I like doing besides being productive? Like, what other things am I actually interested in? And what things do I like doing just for the sake of doing them? Not because anyone's going to give me praise or anyone else knows about it, but I highly recommend for anyone listening who struggles to rest without guilt to start forcing yourself to have time off. Even if you have to sit there twiddling your thumbs, staring at a blank wall, you have to create that void and then intentionally fill it with other things in order to get out of this mentality of working for work's sake. And in For Our Work Week, Tim Ferriss calls it filling the void, and that it's a really important part of the process of becoming more productive. So I highly recommend that. And for me, I've now discovered so many different things that I love doing, and it makes me excited to work on my business because I miss my business. And there are still times where I'm like, oh, I'm so busy, I can't afford to have time off. But I know when I'm saying that that's when I need it the most. And for anyone listening, if you're like, I cannot have time off, you need it the most. I encourage it the most for
Mhm.
you. If you feel threatened thinking about carving time off, even if it's like, okay, I'm not allowing myself to work after 6 p.m., whatever it is you want to have, or before a certain time in the morning, to actually create those boundaries, because otherwise it's like Parkinson's law. The task you have will expand to the time you allow for the task. And we do that just so we never have to really be with ourselves and in that place where we're feeling vulnerable because we're not being productive. So I hope that helps to answer that a bit. But I would recommend as well, in situations where we're like, I know I should rest, like I'm sick, I'm not feeling well, to really practice giving ourselves that permission. And I know it's easy said than done, but it is very simple to do. And for example, in the past couple of weeks, I heard some really tragic news about a family that I know that was devastating. I also got a puppy who has a lot of energy and doesn't like sleeping at night. So I have had a lot of disruptions in the last couple of weeks to my normal plans, and I love being in routines. I'm not perfect at routines, but that makes me feel really grounded. I have not been in my routines at all, and I've just given myself permission for that to be okay, instead of saying I should be more productive, I shouldn't be out, like, to just, when we're actually having to rest and give ourselves some grace, to not then be down on ourselves while that's happening.
Definitely. Tonight aside, because obviously tonight was just my bad night where I probably should have been a little kinder to myself, but usually I'm trying to practice more self-awareness and checking in with myself and being like, okay, no, do you actually need to work on this tonight? Can you take a night off, or can you take the whole day off and spend time with family, friends, or do something else? I don't need to be focusing on the business every spare minute that I have. And recently I was talking about, oh, let's go on vacation. Let's go here. Let's maybe try this place. And immediately I'm like, oh, so if we're going to be there for like a week, then maybe I can like put in a work conference, maybe see if like we can plan it around something that I want to attend. And then maybe, since we're going to be out there, maybe I can actually like meet people and do some podcast episodes. And I started turning it into like a work trip. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, 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 no. This is supposed to be my time off. I do not need to be working while I'm on vacation.
Yeah, and I can relate to that as well. I find myself when I'm traveling, I'm like, great, this is perfect time to work on the business. I'll be so productive. And I have to call myself out on that too. And a way that I like to kind of assess, because a lot of people ask me, well, how do I know when I'm being lazy and when I actually need time off? Or like, how do I tell when I'm avoiding something? Because a lot of times when we're avoiding, that's when we tend to say, I deserve a break. And we go down that whole line of thinking. So I really like to think about what I would tell a friend if they came to me and said, hey, I'm thinking of having today off. What should I do? Because often when it's our friends, if it's something they have to get done, we're like, hey, just push through, get it done as quick as you can, and then you can chill tonight or after the end of the week or whatever it is. And then if they're not feeling well, or we can see they're working a lot, we'd say, hey, you should actually like take the day off, put your laptop away, just enjoy it. So we often can see with someone else very clearly, because we don't have all of those insecurities about what it would mean if they weren't being productive for a day. But when it comes to us, we are trying to answer that question through the lens of our own insecurities and our way of trying to avoid shame and all of that. So it gets a bit more complicated. So that's something that I love to do, to just think, what would I tell a friend? And often we'd say, just get it done or just rest, and we don't add all this drama around it, and it's very clear. So that really helps me.
I love that. So I know in my community, I've heard it often where people struggle letting go in their business or trusting their business to somebody else because they just don't feel like anybody else will love their business or put as much love into it as themselves, or maybe they don't trust somebody else to do it as well as they would. So how can we avoid letting that cripple us in our business and then let go a little bit to allow other people to help us, even though it might not be done exactly how we want it?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm working on at the moment. As I said, I have a team, so I have a few people working for me, and that has been a whole journey in learning the skill set of a leader, which a lot of us aren't actually ever taught. So having to kind of learn that from the ground up, and of course learning how to let go, especially when we have a lot of us, our self-worth tied to our business. It feels very vulnerable to hand that over to someone else. What has really helped for me in that sense are a couple of things. One is being in a growth mindset around the skill of leadership. And so not believing that there are natural leaders and that leadership should be effortless, but to believe that leadership is a skill that can be developed with practice, and there are going to be mistakes. But when we're in the growth mindset, a mistake is exciting. It's great. I've found an area for improvement. I can't wait to improve on it and see myself grow. When we're in the fixed mindset, and maybe if we're having trouble with someone that's working with us and it's not coming naturally, like perfectionists love everything to be natural and effortless. If it's not coming naturally, we tend to think, oh, like it's not working. We get frustrated. And then a lot of people will decide that they shouldn't outsource, or that it's something to do with the other person that's the problem, which it never usually is. It's our own insecurities and us not managing our own minds. So that's one side of it, the leadership skills, seeing that with a growth mindset. And the other side, like you just said, recognizing sometimes people won't do things as good as we can or the way that we can. What I've actually discovered by letting go, especially of a lot of the back end side of the business, is that people can do it a lot better than I can. And by holding on and thinking, I'm the only one who can do this that way. And I've actually, having now let go, and I'm still in that journey, but I have realized, oh shit, people can actually do things, like people who enjoy that kind of task, who think in that kind of way, can actually do it a lot better and a lot more quickly than I can. So I was kind of in this delusion that I was good at doing everything when I wasn't. It just felt more controlled, because at least if I made a mistake, it was my mistake and it wasn't someone else's, and there was less mental drama around that, because I was so used to beating myself up that that wouldn't be a problem to beat myself up. But as well, when it comes to others, a lot of perfectionists are people pleasers. They don't like having uncomfortable conversations. And so if there's a problem, they will tend not to address it and just expect the other person to mind read. So I really have discovered that a lot of times people do great things, and really my role as a leader is to empower them. And because I'm a coach, like I really love that side of things, seeing my employees as people that I'm developing and coaching. And when you're coaching someone, they're not going to be perfect. No one's perfect. So it's really seeing it from that angle. And also mind management is such a huge part of being a leader, and something I like to do when someone isn't doing something the way that I had thought they would, is to ask myself the question, how did I contribute to this outcome? And always when I ask that question and I'm being honest with myself, I can see that I have made an assumption that, like, especially if you're so in your business and you've been in it for a few years, you know so much about it that we think is like common knowledge and common sense when it isn't common sense. So often I have made an assumption about what they know, or just, okay, I'd say something very briefly and you should do it this way. And I haven't actually explained what I meant by that. And then I've been confused about why they didn't read my mind, or I just haven't like finished off explaining the task properly, or things like that. So I always bring it back. I do my best to do this of how did I contribute to this outcome, and then really having that conversation with the person of, hey, this is what needs to be changed, this is how I contributed to it. And also just to have people showing up in the best way possible to really be in this mindset of like, mistakes are okay. We don't need to figure out who made the mistake and blame people. Let's just identify it so we can move on. And when there's that kind of culture, if someone makes a mistake, they will actually tell you about it, because a lot of people are like, oh, I can't trust anyone else. And I don't identify myself as ever having trust issues or anything like that. So that's one for me that I have dealt with. But it's just knowing, and I heard this on a podcast recently, that if you're not good at receiving bad news, you won't receive it. Like, people won't tell you the bad news unless you're able to take it well. So that's something as well I've been focusing on, of if you are going to let go, people are going to make mistakes, quote unquote. And so when they do, to not make it mean anything about them, and to just be like, okay, that's a mistake. Here's what to do differently next time. Let's fix it. And really be focused on the future and problem solving instead of blame and past focus. So that's just, I have a lot of things to say about that. But when it comes to letting go, to just know that your brain's going to, again, freak out and tell you not to do it. But you might actually be surprised at how much better people can be at what you do than you actually are.
Definitely. I love that. That's perfect. Self-confidence, as perfectionists, we tend to be super hard on ourselves. How do we develop self-confidence and then maintain it as a perfectionist?
Yeah, so one of the main beliefs a perfectionist has is I'm not good enough. And this will come from, in the past, often in our childhood, we made that decision that we weren't good enough. And then from that point onwards, we've interpreted everything through that lens. So that's why a lot of perfectionists get a lot of praise, a lot of approval, and it still doesn't feel to actually hit home, because we're interpreting it through that lens of I'm not good enough. So we just dismiss any praise we get, and then we're like, but I have supportive friends and family, like I'm doing really well. Why don't I feel good enough? It's because we have to change that lens. And if I could share a personal story, for me, the way that I got really into that mindset of I'm not good enough, and for, I just want to say as well, for everyone, it's not going to be traumatic. For some people, it can just be a very mundane day-to-day situation, probably at school, or with some kind of authority figure or another child or something like that. But for me, when I was 11, my mom died from breast cancer, and she was sick from, I think, when I was about 5 years old. So for most of my childhood that I remember. And as a child, I made that mean something about me, that I wasn't good enough to have a normal mom or whatever. Like, I have made all these things up that as a child, like, that's what we do. It makes sense then that I'm different to everyone else because my mom died and all of that kind of thing, that she left me. And I had not realized that I had thought about it this way until a couple of years ago, when I had a huge breakthrough that has helped me to feel more confident. So I didn't realize I felt ashamed about it because she died from breast cancer. It actually had, I could see it had nothing to do with me, but as a child, I'd made it something to do with me. And then I had decided I never want to feel that shame again. So then I started like really those perfectionist tendencies of pleasing and perfecting and trying to do everything right so I can get that praise and so that no one else would leave me and all of that kind of thing. And it was only when I was 26 and I was at an event and had this huge breakthrough that I had actually created this whole story about what that had meant. I had just thought, like, I used to not be able to talk about my mom without crying. And I thought that that was grief that I hadn't processed. And when other people, if I talked to other people about it, they would think it was that too. And I had such a big breakthrough when I realized it was shame. And once I saw it was shame and that it actually made zero sense to be ashamed of that, it released so much of this story that I had. And then I called my dad and had a conversation with my dad about, okay, well, like when this happened, I made it mean this, and like not blaming him, like taking full responsibility for my interpretations. And he was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like when this happened, it meant that. And like he told me his interpretations, and it just made me realize that when I was a kid, as most of us do, we put on this lens, like when we have this significant emotional event and we decide I never want to feel that way again, we put on these like glasses, I like to think of them as, that it's like you're perceiving the world through this lens of I'm not good enough, and then everything that we experience we interpret in that way. And so that's why I think a lot of the advice around self-confidence, particularly saying things like I am enough, which I never found effective. I don't teach to do that, because we have a much deeper, stronger subconscious belief that we're not good enough. And so when we say I'm not enough, actually for a lot of us it'll reinforce we're not good enough because it's too far away from our actual belief. But it's really doing personal development work to actually get at those subconscious beliefs that you have that are causing you not to feel confident, because self-confidence is just a mindset. It's just a set of beliefs, and we can have the beliefs we want to have that would make us feel confident. But yeah, it's not about as well digging through the past or getting to the root of things. Like a lot of people I work with, like, I just want to get to the root of it. There's no deep buried root that you have to get and like excavate and get to the bottom of. It's just you had a thought in your childhood that has then been a very persistent thought, and you're still having it today, but it hasn't come from the past. Our feelings today about whether or not we're confident come from our present day thoughts, which to me is one of the most empowering things to know, that we don't have to change the past. We don't have to wish that our parents or our teachers or our siblings or anyone else was different. Everything was exactly how it should be. And now we have the responsibility and the ability to change the way that we're thinking, and including in that is the subconscious beliefs that we have, not just the conscious beliefs about, yes, I'm good, I'm intelligent and all of that, because a lot of us intellectually understand we're good enough, but subconsciously we really don't believe it, and there's that mismatch there. And it's really about resolving those subconscious beliefs and getting them on board with what you want, instead of just doing the work around intellectually believing that you are confident and capable and smart and intelligent. And I know I'm talking a lot here, but I just want to quickly say, if you are praising yourself right now for being smart and being intelligent, or you are praising a child for that or someone else, I really encourage you to get out of that, because that's what gets us into a fixed mindset. So we need to be praising ourselves and others for being courageous, for being thoughtful, for being bold, for putting themselves out there, for putting in effort, really praising the process. That's one of the best ways to get into a growth mindset and overcome perfectionism. So I know a lot of times when we're trying to feel confident, we say to ourselves, I'm really smart, I'm really intelligent, but that just keeps us in the fixed mindset where we then only want to do things that would make us look smart. And because it's hard to look smart, then we just really don't do too much that we haven't mastered before, and we really limit our world that we have. So that's just something I wanted to mention as well. Please don't praise yourself for being smart. It's great to be smart, but praise yourself for the process and the journey and the way that you're showing up throughout that process.
I love that advice. That's beautifully said. It's perfect. So you mentioned doing the work, which now I want to get into. So I want to chat about your coaching program, Perfectionist Getting Shit Done, which I just love that title of it. It's perfect. What does it entail? What are people going to learn? What can people expect to
Yeah.
get out of this program?
Yeah, so we have a monthly group coaching program called Perfectionist Getting Shit Done. As you said, PGSD is what we call it. And it's really just a place, it's all online, but a online community that you can be part of, where I'm in there as well, coaching, where you can do the work as we've been talking about. Because a lot of people, like the reason I started it is a lot of people listen to my podcast and they feel inspired and they have breakthroughs, but their life tends to look pretty similar, or maybe they create a few new habits and it improves in some way, but it's not this dramatic before and after that they're hoping for. So in PGSD, we do the work to actually apply all of the things that you intellectually know. And so we have live coaching calls where I bring PGSDers onto a coaching call and coach them as if it's one-on-one coaching. And I love doing that because watching someone else get coached is even better than getting coached yourself. And it really helps you to feel less alone. I know a lot of people listening to this who can relate to what I'm sharing feel alone in their personal development journey, and that they're in this frustrating place of, I know I have potential, I know I'm intelligent and smart and capable, and yet why am I procrastinating? Why am I always stressed and overwhelmed? Why can't I just get myself to do the things that I know I need to do? So when you see other people sharing those same struggles, there's just this amazing sense of relief. And of course, when you were seeing someone else getting coached, like when you're giving advice to a friend, it's so much clearer when you're not the one who actually has to go away and do the thing, and you don't have all these stories around it. So it's such a great way to see all of these concepts that I talk about on the podcast and when I'm being interviewed, how to actually apply them, because that's what I coach on, like how to really get into that specific situation, what to do in those circumstances. And regardless of whether that person has that same struggle or not, they're probably showing up in a very similar way in some other area of their life, and then they can apply it. So that's one of my favorite parts. We have courses in there. So courses, I have like Dream Habit, Get Out of Your Own Way. I've just created a new money mindset course for perfectionists called Make More Money. That's in PGSD. We have journaling exercises, meditations. It's really a place to do that work and get judgment-free support. We have a community forum that has the most beautiful members and everyone just cheering each other on, but also it's a place to go when you're really struggling and you're like, I just want to give up on this, to actually get that help and get that coaching, so that instead of quitting like you usually would, you can keep showing up and over time get those results. A lot of us think personal development would feel like one breakthrough after the next, and it always feels positive because we feel positive when we read a nice little quote, so we think it's going to feel that way. But actually in practice, personal development often feels like one step forward, two steps back. And for me, on my personal journey, and it's why I do a monthly personal growth update on my podcast, is because day to day, month to month, I'm not like, oh my God, this was amazing, I'm like doing all these things. But when I look back over a year, I'm like, wow, I have grown so much. But day to day, I don't actually feel it. And that's why I have created this community and this coaching program, because perfectionists especially need help and support with following through, because a lot of perfectionists make plans, they love planning, they love having the ideas and struggle to follow through on them. Or for a lot of perfectionists, the other way it can go is that they don't even create goals or plans, or have super vague ones like, I want to get fit, I want to make money, like these vague things, because they're so scared of disappointing themselves, because they've disappointed themselves so many times in the past. So it's really about, just having a place to do that work, having personal support from me and our community. And it's just my favorite thing that I do.
I love it. I'm going to have to check it out. I think that's just brilliant, and I know I'm going to benefit from it. So I definitely need to check that out. I want to talk about your podcast, The Perfectionism Project, which I just love. I've started diving deep, and I've started going from the very, very beginning, and I'm working my way through it. There's a lot of episodes, so it's going to take some time. But for someone who hasn't listened to it, what do you share on there? What can they expect to get out of it? How is it going to help them?
Yeah. So my podcast is probably my second favorite thing I do. I love it. And they're solo show episodes. So it's just me chatting and going through really like sharing a lot of personal stories and a lot of my own experiences and teaching through those. So I'm not a perfectionism expert. And I really just like to think of myself as someone who's just one or two steps ahead on the journey and sharing what I know. So that's how I teach. And it's really that, like, if someone likes listening to me chatting on this, it's very similar, just very conversational. And I do a personal growth update every month to share what I'm actually working on behind the scenes. And then most of the episodes are like, we've talked about a lot of different topics in this interview, but I will do a whole episode on just one really small part of what we've talked about to really dive deep and share a lot of practical advice. And there are a lot of people who have changed their life from the podcast, and then a lot of those who love the podcast end up being in our community and Perfectionist Getting Shit Done so that they can take that work to the next level. But yeah, I highly recommend the podcast. Of course, a bit biased, but it's really a great one. If you are relating to what I'm sharing and you're like, I know I have potential, but I can't get out of my own way, and you feel perhaps like there's something wrong with you, or that you should be further ahead. Like perfectionists have that all or nothing mindset, whether they're ahead or behind or off track, off the wagon, on the wagon, all of that. So if you can relate to that, I know a lot of people when they first start listening just say that they finally feel like they're not alone. So yeah, I'd encourage everyone to go and listen to the Perfectionism Project after this if you did like this episode and what we've been chatting about.
All right. Well, I'm definitely going to put some key episodes that I thought would go great with everything that we just talked through. So I'll link those in the show notes as well. So if anybody wants to learn more about you, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so the best place is the podcast, The Perfectionism Project. Otherwise, I've also created a free 5-day Overcome Perfectionism Challenge. So if you are really wanting to understand what perfectionism is and how you might be experiencing that and how it's stopping you from achieving your goals and what to actually do about it, how to overcome perfectionism, you can do that challenge, and you can go to samlaurabrown.com/loveunplugged to sign up for that one. Also on Instagram, I'm at Sam Laura Brown. My website is samlaurabrown.com. So yeah, they're the main places people can find me.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to do the challenge myself. So I encourage anybody tuning in today to do so also. And that link will also be in the show notes for you. So thank you so much, Sam, for being my guest and for sharing such crazy valuable advice that I know I've benefited from. So I know everybody else will as well. So that we can get out of our own way.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jessica.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to www.projectloveco.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another unplugged conversation.